Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of RevOps Demos That Don't Suck. I am Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of 13,000 plus revenue operations professionals from all across the globe. And it's in our name, but with this series, we like to take demos with some of the leading technology companies that are building products for folks in revenue operations so that you can get a sense and a feel for different tools that are out there that can actually help you do your job better. And so today I'm with Dustin Amrhein, who is the CEO of RevCast. RevCast is a revenue planning and execution engine, but I'm going to let Dustin go into the details of that. And so Dustin, I guess, one, let us know kind of anything that you want to add to that professional introduction for yourself. I always like to ask people too, and I know I didn't tell you about this in our planning, so I'm putting you on the spot here. If there's any non-work related, non-RevCast related, like kind of fun fact that you want to throw in to let folks know a little bit about yourself, please do that. And then give us the quick spiel on RevCast before I start to pepper you with questions.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and thanks for having us on. Dustin Amrhein, I'm a longtime revenue leader, go-to-market leader in largely, private SaaS companies, and have seen sort of the different macro environments that we've operated in over the last 15 years in SaaS, and have led multiple different functions of revenue organizations, and it's really kind of led me to where I am at RevCast now. I'm excited to dive more into that. But outside of work, I chase around three kids as my hobby. So I have three kids that keep me very active, and that's always fun. And my wife, I always joke, is like the real entrepreneur of the family, because she has her own wedding cake bakery business, and is out there constantly. She's her own CEO, CMO, CRO, everything. So I'm just trying to run a strong second in my household.
Yeah, that's awesome. Next, my follow-up question, which we don't need to get into, but now I'm wondering if your wife is a fan of that show, Is It Cake? And if so, can she make a cake? Can she make a cake that would otherwise not be identifiable as a cake?
She is, she can, and she has. So
Nice. I love it. All right,
yeah,
we'll save
yeah,
that for another
yeah,
we'll save that for another episode. That's awesome. Well, give us well, you mentioned, right, you've plenty of your own experience as a revenue leader, and so I think this whole notion of sales planning, sales execution, right, is something you've probably experienced firsthand. But I always like to start with, again, the why and kind of the
yeah.
problem space that you all are attacking. So, what made you I guess decide to kind of join and kind of embark on this journey to solve this particular problem, and what is the problem that you all are really attacking for folks out there in RevOps?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, it was pretty simple. I had been through years and years of just this planning process, and specifically being on the revenue side, working hand in hand with, your peers on the finance side and FP&A and the CFO, and trying to build out the right plans for the year. And that process itself is pretty cumbersome, and many, I know, of our listeners have been through that process. It's hard. There's many different challenges with it, but we managed to get through it. You have your plan, you lock it in, you start executing during the course of the year, and the kind of the dirty little secret is you don't often refer back to that plan, or you didn't often refer back to that plan. And the reason for that historically, Matt, in my mind, is pretty simple. It's because you optimized for the quarter, and the growth at all cost era. You optimize for the quarter. You do everything you can to shift the scales in your favor for the quarter, and you solve future problems when they arise. So even if you know about them, you kick the can down the road. Capital was easy to access, and hey, we could cover up inefficiencies in our go-to-market engine with money. We could hire more people. We could throw more into marketing. But the reality is, like, in this post-zero interest rate era, as we came out of the COVID boom, and I saw this firsthand at my last company, we scaled back our go-to-market engine and we started to build it back up. right? Just like many companies are doing now, you're starting to build back up. And I looked at kind of what we were doing and what our peers were doing around us, because we were talking to a ton of peers during that time to try to figure out, like, what are you seeing? What is your approach? And we were all sort of just saying, we're going to build back, but we're just going to build back more slowly and cautiously. And that was a light bulb moment for me, because I don't think the answer to the post ZERP era, which has been dominated the last 10, 12 years, right? I don't think the answer to that is to just do things that we did before operationally, just more cautiously and slowly. I think it actually takes a completely different approach to excel in this market. And while, yes, there's been a ton of just investment in the software sales stack, if you will, it's really been densely concentrated. It's been concentrated on the growth at all cost movement. And I think our hypothesis at RevCast, and frankly, what we're seeing in the market, is that by becoming world-class at planning and understanding not just the planning process, but executing and being able to adjust on the fly based on what reality tells you, is going to become a competitive advantage very quickly, if it's not already. The problem, though, Matt, is that we haven't done anything to support operators in this space. We have done a ton to support them in the high growth space. And those are a lot of good technologies. I love those technologies. I use them every day. But we've done nothing to support operators in terms of building out, mapping out, modeling out long-term, consistent, efficient growth, and to have guardrails against that in real time to make sure that you're progressing towards that plan. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, we've buried all of this work, this modeling work, this planning work, even the quarterly retrospective check-in that naturally happens. Mm-hmm. All of that is rooted in spreadsheets, right? And that's sort of our enemy right now as a go-to-market operator, is the spreadsheet, where we just have, a lot of data, a lot of static data, and a lot of disconnected data. And that's exactly, what we're looking to tackle and take on with RevCast.
Yeah. So it sounds, and I know I've been there before, and couldn't agree more, right? You go through this exercise of planning, right? You have a number, you have numbers that you want to hit. You do the math to figure out how to get there. You even boil it down to what needs to be done, not only by specific teams, but by specific people on those teams in order to hit your metric. And then, like you said, plans are quickly forgotten, because then you just start to execute, and there's no link between the execution and the planning, which then means when you get back to your next planning exercise, you don't really have any, call it clear learnings, right? That you can say, like, oh, well, this thing worked and it produced this result, or this thing didn't work, so let's not do it again. You have anecdotal feedback, right? Because you obviously went through the quarter or the period and you survived, but yeah, you don't have anything to link those things together. Yeah. So can totally see where that comes in.
Spot on with my experience as well. And I think, to your point about not being able to, or just relying on anecdote, we rely on anecdote a lot. Like, we don't want to admit it, but we do rely on that a lot, even in larger teams. And there are simple assumptions that I've seen in spreadsheets, and that I've experienced in spreadsheets, that frankly I was a big contributor to, that are just carried over year to year and never questioned. I'll give you a great example. Ramps for reps. Yeah. They get set at some point in time and are hardly ever questioned after that. The only question that gets asked about ramps, typically in my experience, is why aren't people ramping faster? Not what should they be, and why should they be that, and what levers do we have to affect it, but why can't we ramp faster? So it's things like that just get carried over, that you end up creating a plan that's flawed in the beginning, but you also just have this issue, the fundamental issue of not being able to adjust in real time. And that's because a lot of the data work required to do that is today done manually. And companies just don't invest in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially your example on ramp, right? Like if your ramp assumption is off by even a week, right? And you bring on, let's say you want to ramp, I don't know, 10 sellers over the next 12 months, right? I mean, that's 1 week times 10 sellers is 10 weeks of potential
Yeah.
selling time, right? I mean, that's 2.5 months, right? That's almost a full quarter. So yeah, if you never actually uh question that particular assumption, or if you're off by something that sounds small, right? If you're like, oh, what's a week, right? For a ramp period, like, well, you compound that over a number of people over time, right? It does add up. So
Yeah.
so it sounds like, so
Yeah.
obviously we talked, right, the planning process, the execution process, two things that have typically been disjointed, right, not linked together. So can definitely see the problem, and I'm sure any revenue operator is, probably still does, right, live and breathe that problem space of going through the planning process, having it built in spreadsheets, and having it be obviously manual work, manual upkeep, and then no linking to the execution that happens. So how are you all kind of building a solution in this particular space, and what are
Yeah.
some of the main use cases, like RevOps use cases, that a revenue operator would have for the RevCast platform?
Yeah. Great question. I mean, for us, it's really three fundamental capabilities. It's one, capture your full plan, your full go-to-market plan in RevCast. And we'll see this in a few minutes, but I think really a big difference in how we approach this, and maybe some others in the market, is that we take a people-centric approach, because the person is the most fundamental unit of both capacity and execution. So if I know about the people, and I know about both the capacity that they provide me as well as their actual execution, I get a much better aggregate level view, and the ability to take action. The other piece, besides capturing the plan, is real-time insight. So we're integrating with your CRM, Matt, and we're pulling in data in real time around both what you've actually sold to date, but as well as the pipeline that you're creating. And we're matching both of those things up against the goals and the assumptions that you built in your plan. And that really leads into the third thing, which is we are kind of a canary in the coal mine, right? We are giving revenue leaders, RevOps leaders, very early warning signals as to the risks that are present quarters out. Like maybe it's the next quarter, maybe it's the quarter after that. But I think that's really critical. I can remember in one of my last companies coming in just after we raised a really large Series B round for the time, and we missed the next 2 quarter numbers. Still grew very quickly, hit a lot of really amazing milestones, but we missed the next 2 quarters, and it was simply because we didn't hire on time. But we were sitting in the quarter, operating in the quarter, hitting a quarter at the time, and didn't see that risk down the road. And that's a horrible thing, right? Like, because you can't dig out of that really quickly. So we really focus on those three areas: plan, execute, and early insight into risk and opportunities. And then increasingly, Matt, like we surround that with our expertise. Myself, my co-founders, we have worked in different revenue leadership positions across sales, RevOps leadership, marketing leadership, in these high growth environments. And we bring that to bear for our customers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And so we talked about kind of the problem space, some of the use cases for the solution. And so I guess I'm curious to see what it looks like when you talk
Yeah,
about planning and execution and some of the risk and opportunities stuff. Walk us through how a revenue operator might leverage the RevCast platform for those things.
absolutely. And what I'll do is I'll walk us through those three dimensions: the plan, the execute, the optimize. And I think it does start with a plan, because you are working against a set of targets and a set of assumptions. And with we call this in RevCast a budget. I think that there's some really key elements here that hopefully stand out. One is we have a target, right? We have a target that is actually a roll-up target of the different teams that are a part of this plan, which I'll dive into in a bit. That does give us a certain level of quota that we plan to deploy throughout the year, and that's key. We plan to deploy this throughout the year, which leads us to attainment assumptions. We also set pipeline goals, right? What will it take to be able to hit that bookings target? And of course, especially in today's environment, we have constraints. We have hard constraints around cost, and so we help our customers understand what is the cost of executing this plan. Now, the plan itself consists of really every team in your go-to-market ecosystem. So that is your direct quota carriers, that is your BDRs, your supporting teams like sales engineers and CS, your supporting functions like marketing and partners. All of that is represented and can be represented in RevCast as teams. And for the teams that are directly in the org, well, then we have the ability, and one of the things that we capture is both a hiring and attrition plan. And I think that it's really beneficial, having worked in spreadsheets most of my career, to be able to come in and say, okay, like, what if I accelerate some hiring here? What does this actually mean from an attainment standpoint and from a cost standpoint? And what if I model, slightly higher attrition later in the second quarter? Like, how does that impact me? And what's the offset there to attainment and cost? So being able to model these and get very quick feedback, I think, is one area that our customers see value in, and something that is, otherwise a little bit of a pain point, especially when you try to communicate this, right, more broadly. When you try to communicate it to your CEO, to your board, to your marketing counterparts, we want to make that really simple. I mean, the reality is, the way that we approach this, or we advise our customers to approach this, is very much bottoms up, right? Like, we like to see targets set at the team level, and we can roll those up. And everything that we talked about before applies at the individual team level. All of what we're seeing and what we call the budget is a combination of the teams, the quotas, and the ramp schedules that we define directly in RevCast. So, for us, we have quotas, we have sales quotas, we have pipeline quotas, we have non-dollar quotas, right? Like, there may be other targets or just non-quota carriers that you want to model as part of this, because we can help you capture the cost of that and the ratios associated. And then we have ramps, and ramps are like my biggest pet project right now, Matt. I think you were spot on with ramps. It's like 1 week off can be a big deal. But I would also say, when you're ramping too fast, as one of our customers found, that can be a big deal, because it's typically costing you too much. You're overpaying in accelerators. So you really need to set assumptions and test them and be able to optimize them over time. And, that's part of what we're doing here in terms of letting you at least capture that assumption. And I'll show you later how we test that assumption.
Yeah. And the ramps,
now,
I guess the ramps you have here, you can set these up for different teams. Like you mentioned, like having your AEs in here and your BDRs in here and other folks. So you can set different ramps for different types of folks.
That's exactly right. So what we look to do is, at the team level, that's where we look to set ramps and look to set quotas, and we can have multiple quotas on the team. And we also, it's interesting too, Matt, I'm sure you're very well aware, like, your first question and seeing that would probably be, well, some people on my team have different quotas than other people on my team. And some people on the same team actually don't carry a quota, because, maybe they're on that team, but they're a supporting function. And that's why we allow you to define roles. And when you define a role, you can come in and you can set, like, hey, no, I want to actually define a quota for that role. And I can have multiple different roles on the team, because I can map a role to any team I want. So we've found, and not surprisingly, we've lived this. You have to, in providing this to our customers, we have to provide a lot of flexibility because everybody's go-to-market structure is a little bit different.
Yeah. Yep. And how does the
So
time period for budgets work? Like, are you setting them and evaluating them? Is it like annually, quarterly, monthly? Can you decide how you look
you
at
can
those budgets?
you can decide. So here we're looking at like the projected performance over the course of a year by month. But we let you define your operating period when you set up RevCast. And we also, regardless of what you set your operating period to be, and we'll see this in a few seconds, when I'm looking at the actual execution in real time, I can look at that monthly, quarterly, or annually, whatever makes sense for me. And that's because like and I'll just go ahead and do it. Once we lock in a budget, what we call finalize, there's a couple of things that happen. One is, as you can see here, we have placeholders for attrition and TBHs. And
Yep.
once we confirm that, that gets generated automatically for us. And instead of having that magical spreadsheet floating around the company of like, who's to be hired and who are
Yeah.
we managing out, I can see everything like in one place, right, in my expected action. So that helps me understand, okay, like what's going to happen, how am I planning? And it becomes a rallying point for revenue teams and talking to their HR teams, this is what we need to do. But the other thing that happens when I lock in that budget is that I start to see, because of that integration with the CRM, I start to see, okay, what is my actual performance? And this is where I can look at it over different dimensions. And importantly, like sales actuals, sure. All of our customers know what their actual sales are at any given point. I get that. What they don't know sometimes is, okay, this was the dark blue line. This was what we actually did. Light blue line, this is what we planned. But the gap here is the gap between the capacity and the assumptions I had for performance versus what they actually delivered. So this tells me that I'm not hitting on all cylinders, right? Like that I do have a performance gap and that it's probably worth digging into. And when it comes to understanding capacity, like you do need to understand, as you know, Matt, like if I look out multiple months ahead and I consider my current hiring and attrition plan and people in seat, what does my coverage look like? And how do I think about that? Do I have gaps that I need to address?
Mm-hmm.
And by the
Yeah.
way, we should probably do the same thing for pipeline generation, right? And pipeline capacity. I think this has been probably the biggest area of interest when I'm talking to sales leaders now. It's like, what can I actually generate in pipeline? And what does that tell me about, yes, I have a hiring plan, but what does that really tell me about when I need to hire and where I need to hire in my business? Because I have to be able to provide that person with ample opportunity. Otherwise, I'm wasting company money and failing that rep, right?
Yep. Yep.
The all important question of how are we doing against attainment
Yeah.
expectations? And never fails. Like we want to see this broken out and compared by teams, by segments. Where do we have hot spots? Where do we have maybe some softness? I mentioned ramp. I think this is just an area that it is not misunderstood, but underappreciated in terms of impact. And so we're trying to make it easier to see, like, okay, how are we actually performing against our ramped assumptions, and where do we have issues? And finally, just headcount management. How am I doing
Mm-hmm.
against plan? Like just consolidating that and making it easier for the RevOps person that probably gets pinged 5 times a month about like how are we doing with our headcount and how are we doing against attrition plans.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned so you mentioned the CRM integration. I guess
Mhm.
what do you integrate with, like Salesforce, HubSpot? Like what are the CRMs that you integrate with? And then what's the just like you said, like you always say, if you've seen one instance of Salesforce, you've seen one instance of Salesforce, right? So like everybody
Yeah,
has
yeah,
has their own, has their CRM configured their own way. So
yeah.
how easy is it to call it to do that integration and kind of configuration within RevCast when it comes to the CRM integration?
We do our best to make that easy, and I agree. At the end of the day, there's a lot of customization that happens in any CRM.
Hmm.
But today we integrate with HubSpot and Salesforce. We have a pretty simple flow where you go through and we have a wizard that walks you through connecting, pointing us at a couple of key fields. And then
Yeah,
we pull in things and we say, okay, like, hey, here are all the stages that we saw in your opportunity. Help us understand what's qualified pipeline and non-qualified pipeline, and set the order for us, right? Like help us understand if we're going to build out this funnel view of your pipeline, what that should look like. And then kind of the same thing with types when we think about like sales actuals and things. It's like what's the type of the opportunity, what's the type of the opportunity, and how should we think about that mapping to sales booked close one. So we try to give you enough flexibility without being overbearing and becoming weeks and weeks of mapping, to get up and going fast with RevCast.
yeah. Are there any requirements on um like this on the CRM side that people need to uh be aware of, call it, in order to get at some of the data points and analytics that you need in the RevCast platform? For example, like do you need to have people time stamping stage changes or like anything like that where it's like, hey, I got to make
It's a
sure
good
that I'm
question.
collecting, like that I've got my CRM set up this way in order to be able to pass the right data into a tool like RevCast?
We're the biggest thing is we need to understand on an opportunity record, what is the field that indicates value that you want us to
Hmm.
accrue to pipeline and that you want us to accrue to sales. And it can be a custom field. Like you point us at the field and we're good to go. Um, there are some things that we do. For instance, when we connect to Salesforce, HubSpot does this natively, but when we connect to Salesforce, as long as you haven't turned off the default of history tracking for opportunities, we're able to recreate some of the history of what you've done in the past. So we're able to actually show you, and it's a new visual that we'll have pretty soon. What was day one pipeline like 4 quarters ago or 5 quarters ago? And how did that convert throughout that quarter? Right. So we go into the past and help you understand your own benchmarks for performance, and hope to surface that to you to be able to influence future period planning. And I'm pretty bullish on being able to get a lot more out of our CRM integrations. I think there's
Yeah,
just a wealth of information there.
yeah,
So we'll be investing more there for sure.
yeah, makes sense. And and then before we go on to the insights piece, I guess just last question on the integration side is, are there any outside of the CRM integration, any other integrations you have on the data side that people should be aware of, where you can pull in, or they have the option to pull in more data points outside of the CRM?
Yeah, our main thing now, and we have an API, and we allow our customers to use our API when they need to. But we also import key elements in CSV form. So that we do work with some customers that maybe aren't at the place of having HubSpot or Salesforce yet, or have something different. So we're taking sales data in the form of CSV. We're also taking initial user employee data from CSV form out of an HR system,
Yeah.
because that's the lingua franca of HR systems, CSV.
Yep.
So we do that, but no other point-to-point integrations right now.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, so we've got we put together our plans or our budgets in RevCast. We leverage the the visuals that you just showed us to see how we're executing towards that plan, identify our gaps. And so, yeah, the third part, I guess, of this is the insights piece, right? How can we, how do you all help revenue operators kind of proactively identify things that they should care about and kind of answer that question of like, okay, so what? What do I do now?
Yeah, and this is where I think there's the potential for the biggest impact in taking this kind of approach, because it's to some degree easy to see things that are happening to you in the quarter and maybe think about how do I optimize for the quarter, and do things differently in the quarter. Much harder to see things down the line. And this is exactly what we focus on. If you can see here, one is we just give you a quick heads up view scorecard of what's happening in the business. Like, where am I against key metrics, and whether it's bookings, quota deployed on the street, attainment. But really then, and we're seeing it's kind of busy, but we're looking at all segments and all teams right now. We can drill in. But where's my risk? Like, if I look out, like, where do I have fundamental risk that I need to be aware of? There may be things I can do about it. There may be limited things I can do about it, but knowing helps you at least understand where the risk is coming from. So we're looking at things like, hey, are we behind on hiring to the degree where it fundamentally affects our quota coverage, right? Where it puts us at jeopardy? Are we behind on pipeline generation to the degree that it really messes up, like jeopardizes our future? Does conversion rates, are they off of our assumptions? So we're taking all of that, and what would normally be done, Matt, like in my experience, this would all normally be done in a QBR, right? Like, we would all sit down, the RevOps team would have prepared for a week, the data team would have been involved. We're just automating a lot of this so that you're getting in some sense, a portion of an ongoing QBR, and you don't have to wait. Like, in real time when that's happening. And so we also break this down. We have a call a weekly capacity forecast that is also sent out of RevCast to Slack, to email, because we want to make it easy. We want to engage revenue leaders where they are, right? Like, we want to give them this information where they are, and they can always log into RevCast and find out more, but we want to make sure they have it first and foremost.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I can see, I mean, I'm having flashbacks to all of the like the quarterly reviews that I've put together internally, or even the weekly or monthly kind of like planning meetings that you have, right? Where you talk about, again, like, hey, what's going on? Where do we have risks? Where do we have opportunities? And like you said, if you think about it, I mean, if you're using something like a CRM, like a Salesforce or a HubSpot, you're creating deals, you're moving those deals through your pipeline, you're marking them as closed won, you're marking them as closed lost. They're being done by specific people, right? So you're sitting on a lot of the data points that you need to know how long it takes someone to ramp, or how long it takes deals to get through your pipeline, how much pipeline you need to create now in order to hit your target for next quarter, which you may not even be thinking of yet. But it's really hard to get at those insights without doing a lot of digging manually, right? And so, yeah, this is a great way to automate a lot of that, and then you can focus on the actions, right? The things
Right.
that you should do based on what insights are delivered through RevCast, instead of spending, like you said, a week or 2 weeks to even just get to a point where you can identify what those are.
Yeah. And the real cost, Matt, is, like, to your point, it's not really the cost of the 1 or 2 weeks. I mean, that's kind of built into what you expect, at least partially, to spend time on in RevOps or in a data science team. The real cost of the company is inaction, and inaction for a certain time period where maybe we were within range to mitigate or fix the issue, but now we're not, and we're going to suffer consequences. The other the other area that we try to automate a lot of, and I talked about employees and the importance of employees, being front and center in our platform. For us, we want to make it easy to understand what's happened and to manage the status of an employee throughout their tenure with the companies, right? So we want to give you like up to date, like, hey, what's happening with this employee? Like, how are they doing in the quarter, and on key metrics like attainment and bookings and pipeline. But also, and this is relatively new employee, but if they had been there longer, you would see just row after row of, hey, how have they moved through the company, and what has their performance been at each of their different stops in the company. This is something that I know as a revenue leadership team, we talked about a lot in terms of like, where's the talent, and how do we nurture the talent, put them in the right place, and make sure we have the right people in the right spots. We're getting all of this because that's just the nature of how we get things out of the CRM. So we're automating this type of view for you. And then we're making it super easy to manage the employee, just the different kinds of things that happen to an employee, right? Like they leave, they get promoted, they go on leave. All of these have impacts on quota, and they have impacts on your capacity. And because we know quota, we know how that's associated with different people, roles, and teams, then we can manage all of this for you. So if I were to change any of this, you get an automatic update right when I change that view.
So you mentioned kind of as we went throughout this, we talked about the planning, the execution, and the insights. You brought up a couple of examples of how your customers are using the tool and the product. So who, speaking of customers, so who is typically a good fit for the RevCast platform? Like what type of companies, accounts, what are like the problems that people are facing today? Like for someone watching this, like, who are some examples of, again, some either customers that you have or who's typically a good fit for the tool?
Yeah. We typically, I would characterize it in two buckets. One is the fast growing company, maybe recently funded, tasked with growth, but getting a lot more oversight into what that growth looks like. So think about your A's, your B's, and your C's in the SaaS world, at least, and recently funded, growing, maybe don't have, process fully built out, maybe don't have, there's RevOps there, but they don't have a team of 20 or 30. They have a team of 2 or 3, right? And they're trying to keep the lights on. And they need a way, and the revenue leader needs a way to capture this in a structured manner, to communicate it across the company in a structured manner, and to ensure, and to not ensure, but to adjust constantly. Because in those high growth environments, you have a plan. The second the fiscal year starts, it changes. I mean, at least the path to the target changes, and you need to know that. So we work with a lot of those kind of like high growth environments. And then we work with companies that frankly survived, the last 3 to 4 year run in our environment. And they are now at the point of rebuilding and, want to rebuild in a responsible way, want to rebuild in a different way, and want more systems driven support to make that happen. So those are typically the kind of companies, and most of the companies we work with have a strong RevOps leader in place, Matt. And it's very much like a partner to the head of sales or the CRO, or whatever that role is, and they want to be able to bring these kind of insights constantly to support that leader.
Yeah, it makes sense. And what I know we talked about, again, some of the the CRM integrations that you have, the wizard that helps people guide people through that. So as folks think about implementation and kind of getting started, what does that implementation process look like? Is it pretty how quickly can folks kind of get up and running? And is it something they can do on their own? Do they require support or help from your team? Is it a mix of both? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the walking through the integration with the CRM They're really straightforward. You don't need our help on that. Entering the plan is straightforward as well in terms of data input. We like to, the implementation process is certainly less than a week. I mean, we've got people up and running in RevCast in less than half a day, just depending on, do we have access to your CRM? Like, can we move quickly on that front? We like to engage though, because we like to not be there just as implementers, but to be there as sounding boards. We've seen a lot of these both in our own careers as well as in our tenures at RevCast. And we want to be able to share best practices. We want to be able to share based on the nature of your business and what you're trying to achieve, how to best leverage RevCast towards those aims, what to look for, what not to look for. So I guess the modern parlance for that would be like, customer success, but we like to engage just to extend our expertise.
Yep. And that makes sense. And is there, I guess, if people are looking at this and they, they want to give the product a try, do you all have either like a free trial, a way that they can self-serve sign up on your website? Do they need to go through a salesperson to get access? What's the best way that someone can actually give the product a go for themselves?
Yeah, we do numerous free trials. The best way is just to sign up for a demo and let us know you're looking to stand up a trial, and we'll orient that engagement to just understanding what you're trying to achieve and get you set up with a trial. It's that simple. We're not going to put you through a discovery call to get to a demo to then maybe get to a trial. Like, we want people to be hands-on. We know that this is this is a newer market. This is a newer space sector category in the revenue tech world, and a lot of times seeing and put your hands on it is really important.
Yeah. And is there anything you can share on pricing or how you guys charge, how folks should be looking at the cost side of the equation for a RevCast platform?
Yeah, from a structure standpoint, we charge just based on the size of your go-to-market team. So very similar to how you would pay for a CRM, basically any other rev tech tool.
Yep.
We're not as expensive as a CRM or many of the other rev tech tools, but same structure. We just find it's easier to convey, frankly.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. And I know we talked about the I guess the return on investment or the value side of the equation before is not necessarily the time that it'll save your team of being able to have this information prepared for you instead of having to do it manually, but essentially the time that you would otherwise lose not being able to course correct, right, which ultimately has a direct impact on your top line. So is that the best way for folks to kind of look at value, is really on the revenue side of things here?
Yeah, revenue and cost, right? Like, there's the cost of inaction on both fronts. For instance, on the cost side, one of our customers plugged up RevCast and pretty quickly, within a week, found that historically they had been too generous with ramp cycles, and they were overpaying a commission consistently. They were paying ramp accelerators, which, as you know, are more expensive in many cases than regular accelerators. And they were able to adjust the ramp to be fair, still be fair, but to be fair to the company as well, and save $200K in a matter of a few weeks. So I think there's that side of it. There's finding those inefficiencies and just the waste, frankly, that crops up because we don't test assumptions enough historically and go to market with some of these things. But then there's absolutely the top line impact. There's mitigating risk to top line impact by acting more quickly. It's a big part of the ROI equation.
Yeah. And then last question for you. We talked about, obviously, competition on the spreadsheet side, right? With most folks using spreadsheets, things like that today. There's certainly other pieces of technology that are out there to help as well on the planning side of things. But what's if you had to take just one thing and one thing only that really sets RevCast apart from any competitors, whether it's spreadsheets or another piece of technology or just anything in between, what's the one thing that you would say kind of puts you all at the top?
I think it's the tie to the individual person, because I'll go back to that. The person is responsible for capacity in your org, and the person is responsible for execution in your org. And by understanding the people, and that being the fundamental building block of like the plans that we build and the visuals that we build, I think that is just different than having a scenario engine, frankly.
Mhm. Yeah, makes sense. Well, Dustin, thank you for walking us through things and kind of showing us everything from, again, planning to execution to insights. For folks who are interested or want to take a look, again, revcast.com is where you can learn more about the product. Like Dustin said, if you're interested in a free trial, just submit your information there. Let them know that you're interested in a free trial, and they'll get you hooked up. Dustin and the team are also in the RevOps Co-op Slack group. So if you're in there, you can find Dustin or Jeff or anybody else on the RevCast side to interact and engage with. They've got tons of knowledge. And then also LinkedIn is another place where you can find them. But with that, I will let you all run. So Dustin, again, thank you, my friend, for kind of giving us a rundown, and I'll see you all on the flip side. So take it easy, everybody.